Good morning. Sorry, I popped in a bit late. I was just watching my dog, wondering what she was doing. My name is Cindy Hackett. I'm a member of the Board of Trustees of the Tahoma Unitarian Universalist congregation. And I join you this morning from Gig Harbor, which was originally on the land of the small group of the Puyallup Indians. The name of the band is Squabish, and I join you from their heritage. We welcome all who are joining us with a longing for community, the hope for peace, and those who are seeking justice. We are a diverse congregation which encourages each of us who come through these doors or through these screens to find their own truth and belief. We invite all who join us in a search for meaning and community, guided by reason, respect for each other, and by love. The wonderful thing, or one of the wonderful things about this virtual platform, is that we have an opportunity to welcome guests from outside our traditional geographic area. And we can also welcome people who may find it hard to travel right now, regardless of the fact that travel isn't encouraged, and may find it hard to travel to church during the, what do I call it? During the usual time, or what even is usual? So a special welcome to all of our new friends who are joining us and our returning friends from near and far away. I invite you to follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Links to the video version of this service will be posted there this week, as well as on our website. It's a great way to refresh what brought you joy or thoughtfulness during this hour together. You'll find the announcements that I'm about to read, actually not, I could never remember them, in our e-news, but some highlights include these. Today at 11:30, following the service, children are invited to join Nancy Slocum for Kids Chapel. And at 4 p.m., middle and high school youth are invited to the kickoff for a series on world religions. Always fascinating. On Tuesday, Election Day, should you have forgotten, UU ministers from around the country will offer a space on Zoom for spiritual grounding between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. Pacific time. And I think the link for that will be in the e-news. On election night at 6:30 p.m., Linda will host a gathering space on Zoom. And if national vote counting continues past election night, Linda will host 15 minutes of hope beginning on Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. every evening until we have a result. On Wednesday night, join ministerial intern Arian Babcock for a journey through CUP's history, which is the Covenant of Unitarian Universalist Pagans, and how that works today, since Tahoma now has an official CUPS group, which is very exciting to me. This is quite interesting. And looking forward to Saturday, November 7th, kids age 7 to 11, and why is it only kids, just saying, are invited to a Clone Wars watch party with Arian Babcock, our expert in all things Star Wars. Some of these programs require registration, others are drop-in, but you can find all those details by visiting our church calendar online, and the links are there too, or in our e-news that you can find on our website, and you can also subscribe to it as well. So yeah, those of you who aren't subscribing to the e-news, please think about that, because we're trying to offer lots of things to help you feel connected. We also really thank people for their ongoing financial support. We know it's difficult. We know it's hard to feel connected, and we are so grateful for your support. It makes these programs possible. It makes it possible to pay our staff who create and facilitate these programs. and it makes possible those connections that we treasure. And so now, let us prepare to gather and worship. And it is so good to see you all.
Good morning, friends. Our opening words today are by Cindy Landrum. Spirit of love and of life. We gather together in different ways this morning, from computer screens, from telephones, from car radios. We gather reaching across the wires, waving from a safe distance, to come together in religious community. From living room to front porch to car seat, we gather as we are able, ready to be of service to each other and to the world, ready to build the community of hope and of love as we face this bright morning, offering our love, our commitment, our hopes, and our prayers in service to one another and to this world.
Please join me in the unison reading as Nancy lights our chalice. You can find the words in the chat. We light this chalice in deep respect for the mystery and holiness of life, in honor and gratitude for those who have gone before, with love and compassion for those who dwell among us, and with hope and faith for the generations to come. Our opening song today is Building Bridges.
Good morning. My name is Nancy Slocum, and I am the Director of Religious Exploration for Children and Youth here at Tahoma UU Congregation. This is our time for all ages, the time when we're in our sanctuary, we have kids and people young at heart come forward for a story or a lesson. So come close to your computers. Join me today as we do our time for all ages. So, what do you want to be when you grow up? When people ask you this question, typically what they're asking for is, what kind of work do you want to do when you are an adult? But I sometimes like to think, what do you want to be? Maybe you want to be kind and compassionate. Maybe you want to be a guitar player just for fun, or a gardener. But when people ask the question, they often want to know, what do you want to do for a living? What kind of job will you hold? Now, I'm guessing that many of you have some ideas about what you might want to do when you grow up, or maybe you have no idea, and that's okay. You're still young. You've got a lot of time to figure it out. And the thing that I've also learned during my lifetime is that you can start with one job and you might end up working a different job. You might start doing something completely different based on something that you learn about as you get older. Ask your grown-ups if they're doing the same job that they were doing when they first started working. You can even ask them what they thought they wanted to be when they were little. I know if you were to have asked me when I was little what I wanted to be when I grew up, I would have told you I wanted to be a nurse. And then when I was in middle school, that changed. I wanted to be a veterinarian. And the fact of it is, I've never done either of those jobs. And I don't think that I ever would have guessed that I would be a religious educator in a Unitarian Universalist congregation. Surprise. But today in our service, we are talking about a man who thought he knew what he wanted to be when he grew up. His name was John Lewis, and he was born in 1940. And he died just this last year when he was 80 years old. He was born 80 years ago. And he grew up in the state of Alabama, which is in the southern part of the United States. And he and his family lived on a farm where they grew cotton to sell. And they also grew fruits and vegetables and had animals for food. So they grew most of their own food. And it was hard work on that farm. His father would plow the fields using a plow that was pulled behind a mule. He wasn't on a big tractor. And his mother would do the laundry, and she would build a fire outside and put a great big pot on the fire to warm up water. And then she'd use that warm water to wash all the clothing by hand and hang it out on a clothesline to dry. There was no washing machine and no dryer in their home. Everyone had jobs to do on the farm, and even John had jobs to do. When he was young, maybe about 5 years old, he was put in charge of the chickens. He'd have to feed them every day, and he'd have to clean out their nests and collect the eggs. And that was a very important job so that they would have eggs and chickens to eat. John and his family went to church every Sunday. The church they went to was a Christian church, and there he would learn stories from the Bible and the teachings of a man named Jesus. One of the important lessons that Jesus taught, and that John Lewis probably learned in church, was what you may have heard of called the Golden Rule. Have you ever heard of the Golden Rule? I know we've sometimes talked about it in classes when we've had our RE classes here at church. The Golden Rule says that we should treat all people the way that we would want them to treat us. And how do we want to be treated? How do you want to be treated? I imagine you want people to be kind to you and generous and respectful. And the Golden Rule tells us then that we should treat people kindly and be generous and respectful. Well, John, he really loved going to church. He loved being in church with all the other people. He loved singing the songs, and he loved listening to the ministers who would preach from the front of the church, much like Reverend Linda and our intern Arian, who preach here. Well, right now, they're preaching from their homes on Zoom, of course, but someday they'll be back up here preaching in the front of our church. Ministers are sometimes called preachers because they preach. That is, they give a sermon or a lesson to the people in the church, maybe a little bit like what I'm doing right now during our time for all ages. And John would watch the preachers and he would think, that's what I want to be when I grow up. And so he would go home and he would practice. He would think about lessons to talk about and to preach. And guess who he preached to? He preached to his chickens. He would stand there and he'd have 60 or so chickens running around him, and he would preach the lessons that he had learned at church. He did it so often that his brothers and sisters, all 9 of them, nicknamed him Preacher. And he loved that nickname because he wanted to be a preacher. Now, the little town where John grew up in rural Alabama was mostly Black people who lived there. He never saw white people when he was very young. And when he got to be a teenager and started going into town more, though, he started to see more white people. And he began to see the ways that white people and Black people were treated differently. Remember, he was born over 80 years ago. And we've talked about it before, how even today, white people and Black people can be treated differently, and how we are all working to change that. We believe that all people, no matter the color of your skin or any kind of difference you might have, all people should be treated with kindness and respect. We want to treat people the way we want to be treated. The Golden Rule that John Lewis learned about as a child. But when he was a child, where he lived in Alabama, there were a lot of differences in what white people could do and what Black people could do. For instance, only white people could use the public library. Could you imagine that, not being able to go to the public library? And many places were segregated, meaning they kept Black and white people separate. There were different bathrooms for Black people and white people, different drinking fountains. On buses, Black people weren't allowed to sit in the front of the bus. The Black people sat in the back and the white people sat in the front. Black and white children didn't go to school together. And many businesses would just not allow Black people inside. When John Lewis was a teenager, there were a lot of people who were beginning to try to change these rules that required everybody be segregated. You've probably heard about some of the people like Dr. Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks, but there were thousands and thousands of people who worked with them, and John Lewis became one of those people. He did go to school to become a minister, but much of the preaching that he ended up doing was at rallies and demonstrations where people would gather, and he would speak out against segregation. He would preach for equality for all people. Some of you have maybe heard of the Selma to Montgomery March. John Lewis and others led a march of thousands of people marching from the town of Selma, Alabama, to the city of Montgomery in Alabama. And they were marching to support the Civil Rights Act, which was a law that they were trying to get passed that was designed to create equality for all people in our country. We wanted people to be treated fairly, everyone to be treated the same. But as they marched across a great big bridge, there were police on the other side of the bridge who told them that they had to leave. And all the marchers stopped and they started to pray. And they were peaceful. But the police decided that they had to make those people move. And so they sprayed tear gas. And then some of them began beating the protesters. And John Lewis was injured very badly. He got hit in the head and it broke his skull. He had scars from that for the rest of his life. But that didn't stop John. He kept working his whole life to make the world a better place, to try and change things so that everybody is treated with fairness and respect. And he became a congressperson in Washington, D.C. Do you know what Congress is? Congress is a place where every state in the United States gets to send people, representatives from their state, who go there and help make decisions about things that happen in our country. One of the things they do is vote on laws. And so John Lewis, he worked a long, long time in Congress. And while he was there, he never stopped speaking out. He never stopped preaching to make the world a better place for everyone. When John Lewis was a little boy, he thought he would be a preacher in a church, but instead he became a preacher to our whole country. Through his actions and through his words, he never stopped working for equality, for fairness, for justice. And I find myself wondering, what do you want to be when you grow up? That is our time for all ages. I send you off with our words. We hold you in our love as you go, as you go. May your heart be at peace as you go, to nurture the spark of your precious life. We hold you in our love as you go. Take care.
Hi, my name is Sheila Wybrow, and I am one of the newest appointees to the Board of Trustees. You may have seen me around, probably most visibly in the TUUC Ensemble Choir, which I miss being a part of so much. Perhaps you too have felt adrift and disconnected from our beloved community. I'm grateful for the connection I've been able to maintain with TUUC through the magic of Zoom. Instead of the days melding together into each other, I've been able to fill my need for connection by taking online classes. I've also joined discussions with the movie group, and of course I have my connection through attending regular board meetings. TUUC has helped me feel purposeful and connected. I hope you have also found connection through the many opportunities TUUC has available. You're likely longing for a gathering in person and seeing everyone's friendly faces. Wow, I imagine the pandemic over, everybody coming together, and everyone hugging on our first Sunday back in the building. That's a dream for the future I hold on to. When the time comes, I want to be sure that TUUC will still be there, and that's why I've continued my financial support for our congregation. I've been amazed by the work Nancy Slocum has done to transform the RE program into a virtual treasure for the parents and children of TUUC. I've been comforted and sustained through Linda's Sunday sermons, which wouldn't be possible without the hard work of Linda and the church staff to broadcast every Sunday morning on Zoom. I've been enriched by Zoom classes that were taught by Arian, our ministerial intern. If you found sustenance in these or any of the many opportunities for connection offered by TUUC, or just want to make sure TUUC is still here when we're able to return to gathering in person, please consider making a financial contribution to help sustain TUUC for now and in the future. So, until we meet again.
Now is the time where we offer our gifts to the work of this congregation. The money we give is an integral part of keeping our staff who work tirelessly to keep our community strong and keep our building running during these volatile and unprecedented times. Even though we are physically apart, our gifts are stronger together. You can text or click the link in the chat to make a contribution. Thank you for your generosity. Please join me in the unison reading that you can also find in the chat. We dedicate ourselves and our offerings to the work of this congregation, weaving a tapestry of love we call community, both within and beyond these walls. Thank you. Our reading today is an excerpt from John Lewis's last words. Ordinary people with extraordinary vision can redeem the soul of America by getting in what I call good trouble, necessary trouble. Voting and participating in the democratic process are key. The vote is the most powerful nonviolent change agent you have in a democratic society. You must use it because it's not guaranteed. You can lose it. You must also study and learn the lessons of history because humanity has been involved in this soul-wrenching existential struggle for a very long time. People on every continent have stood in your shoes through decades and centuries before you. The truth does not change, and that is why the answers worked out long ago can help you find solutions to the challenges of our time. Continue to build union between movements, stretching across the globe, because we must put away our willingness to profit from the exploitation of others. Though I may not be here with you, I urge you to answer the highest calling of your heart and stand up for what you truly believe. In my life, I have done all I can to demonstrate that the way of peace, the way of love and nonviolence is the most excellent way. Now it is your turn to let freedom ring. When historians pick up their pens to write the story of the 21st century, let them say that it was your generation who laid down the heavy burdens of hate at last, that peace finally triumphed over violence, aggression, and war. So I say to you, walk with the wind, brothers and sisters, and let the spirit of peace and the power of everlasting love be your guide.
The spirit of peace, be with us. Let us pause for a few moments of reflection and quiet meditation or prayer, as is most your custom. Spirit of love and of life, come and rest upon us. Be with us for these few moments of calm. Let us quiet our striving and allow a time for breath and for silence, a time to let go of all longings and desire. Let us simply be without worry or wish. In the quiet of our hearts, let peace pour in. not only the absence of striving, not only the absence of conflict, but the fullness of peace that may be. Peace, embodied in how we treat each other, how we live into the world in acts of compassion and care. Peace shown in the world by the works of justice and mercy. Peace, known by the safety of children and those who are most vulnerable. Peace, created by and for each of Earth's children within and beyond, building a web that links each to all the boundaries of what is. Into our hearts pour this presence of peace. Spirit of love and of life, you who animate us. The world in its troubles and chaos cries out for the blessing of peace. May we be those who draw together the threads of peace found in the beauty of the earth that surrounds us, found in the common and simple acts of kindness and compassion that fill our world. May we draw together these threads of peace and weave peace for our weary, beloved world. In the quiet of these moments, let us open our hearts to the presence of peace as we pause in stillness. So may it be, world without end. Amen. My colleague, David Rankin, tells this story of a pre-election day sermon that he offered some decades ago. He says, in 1968, I delivered a sermon prior to the presidential election. It was not a partisan plea, since I was not overly impressed with either Richard Nixon or Hubert Humphrey. Instead, I merely recommended at the conclusion of the sermon that I hoped that everyone would vote for the most intelligent, experienced, and compassionate candidate. So imagine my surprise when a man confronted me in the reception line and angrily shouted, "How dare you use the pulpit to support Hubert Humphrey?" Surely, were I to offer this recommendation again today, a similar complaint might be made to me, although I have a suspicion that not many would complain, actually. You may not know that in New England churches, Unitarian churches in New England, for centuries, as I understand it, there has been a tradition of ministers offering an election sermon. Traditionally, it has been, as I understand it again, it has been a call to get out and vote, to do your civic duty, that reminder that it matters that we participate in democracy. It's the way that we make democracy its best. In this time and in this place, it's likely that you have already cast your ballots, as my family has done. Our mail-in voting process means that we miss that experience of meeting up with our neighbors at the polls, that bustle of democratic process as we rub elbows with the folks who live nearby, see the polis. We miss that experience of being a part of this great event, at least face to face. In all likelihood, all of you have already voted. The results are simply waiting now for the last stragglers to come in and be counted before they are announced to the world. So this isn't as much a sermon to exhort you, that was a good one, exhort you to vote, though if you haven't, let me suggest that you go ahead and do that and drop it in a ballot box today. The sooner the better. But today I want to invite you to continue to live in hope. Live in hope. Now that's a tall order for those of us who have lived through the last 4 years, and particularly over the last year. This last week, I was setting up a meeting with a couple of colleagues, and I suggested in my email to them that we meet on Wednesday coming up. One participant wrote back, I'm stressed about committing to that day, but I know that we can cancel if we need to save democracy. Another friend commented that she couldn't find a sweet spot, but was swinging back and forth between two sides. She doesn't want to hope in fear of being devastated again. And she cannot bear the thought of living for 4 more years under our present administration. And I wonder if you are there too. Can I get an amen from anyone out there? I can hear you in my imagination, friends. 4 years ago, I went back and looked at my sermons around this time 4 years ago. And 4 years ago in my sermon, I talked about John Lewis's life and story. Because of his death this year, that story is more present to me, at least, perhaps to all of us. His lifelong faithfulness to the struggle for human rights, starting with voting rights, is a model for us, especially today. But that's a thing about hope, because you see, hope isn't a feeling that we get, at least not the way that I see it. It's a practice. It's a practice grounded in what Lewis has called on us to do and to be in the world, especially now that he's gone, to follow the highest calling of our hearts. And that's a practice because it is so hard to do. And we continually get distracted or fearful, and we stray away from what is best and right all the time. At least I do. I suspect you do too. So we have to practice hope every day. Now, that's not an easy thing to do. I think about it when I remember a colleague who teaches meditation, who always says that our minds are like puppies. And I like that image a little better than monkeys. Our minds are like puppies. You may know how that is, right? You pause to meditate or simply to focus, and suddenly you are making grocery lists or reworking that conversation where you were angry or the other person was exactly wrong and you need to tell them how. You rework those moments when your heart is hurting, when you're angry, or you've wandered off in any number of directions, sniffing the ground like a puppy, distracted by a squeaky toy, or by the human across the room whose hand seems to actually be free for belly rubs. Alex, my friend, says we have to continually say to ourselves, sit, stay. In a like manner, I think we have to still the puppy, to pay attention not to the latest outrageous act that has happened. Don't start counting them up right now. But we have to drag ourselves back to that highest calling of our hearts. How will you live it? How will you create it? I'm going to share our the Menti we've been creating. With any luck, this will be a little more flawless, a little more streamlined than it was last week when I was trying to share What do you think, you guys? Can I make it? Yes, I can. There are your words. Our words of love and compassion, of peace, kindness, family, empathy, connection, truth, service, social justice, the highest callings of our hearts. There in front of us. I'll share this on our Facebook page and in our and a link in our e-news this week as we go along. How will you live this? How will you be this in the world? That highest calling of your heart. John Lewis, in his essay, and I commend that full essay to you that Jonina shared some of, he recalls in his young adulthood, as a young man, when he began listening to Martin Luther King Jr., as he spoke about philosophy and the discipline of nonviolence. And he said more at that time too. John Lewis recounts it. He said, it is not enough to say it will get better by and by. He said, each of us has a moral obligation to stand up, and speak out. When you see something that's not right, you must say something. You must do something. Democracy is not a state, it is an act. And each generation must do its part to help build what we call the beloved community, a nation and a world society at peace with itself. It is an act, and each generation must do its part to help build what we call a beloved community, a nation and world society at peace with itself. These last 4 years that I think have actually gone on about 87, these last 4 years have revealed many truths about our country. It has further uncovered, for those of us who have not seen it, some of the rot that has been present, but that those of us who are white don't often see, or if we have seen it, we forget it again and again. Wallace Shawn, age 76, in an essay about what it's been like growing up and into this age, he notes, our country has been brutal for a very long time, from the beginning actually, and now the rhetoric began to mirror reality. Let me read that again. The country had been brutal for a long time, from the beginning really, and now the rhetoric began to mirror reality. I'll add that the rhetoric not only mirrors the reality of brutality, it also emboldens and supports that brutality. There is so much work to be done, my friends, living out the highest calling of our hearts. Because hope is a practice, something that we step into again and again, and democracy is an act. Whatever the results are, when this election has been decided, all of that will continue to be true, perhaps even more so. The practice of hope and the act of democracy will continue to be essential to continue to build the world that we dream of and the world that we know is possible. Hope is a practice and democracy is an act. And John Lewis, of very blessed memory, calls us to practice and to act in service to that highest calling of our lives, the highest calling of our hearts. Let us never give up. So may it be. I invite you now to pause and breathe. I invite you to set an intention for this day, for this week, perhaps for the next year. What is that highest calling? How will it show through in your life? Let us pause in the stillness. These closing words from John Lewis: do not sink into a sea of despair. Never be afraid to make some noise. Stay hopeful until your dying day, and we can make a way out of no way. May it be so for us all. Amen.